Okay, so it's 9 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get started. So it looks like I have one viewer here, so thank you for being with me. To kind of start, I'm going to show you a little bit about what my goal is for today and kind of talk to you a little bit the process and the tools that I have along the way. So in my previous video, this was my example tile that I created, where I started with the gray balloon tile and then sculpted the gray eyepiece on top of the little resin cabochon for the eye, and then sealed everything with resin after it was dried, so it gives that kind of 3D effect to match the scaling there. So I have my next one that I'm working to do this with. It's kind of like a red dragon theme. It's got the red and the gold with the eyepiece here. And so really I have a couple of things just that I have on the side. I have my oven baked clay. This really can be any brand. I happen to be using the Sculpty kind, but I know they have the Assortment and some others. So I really just need to find one that'll work for you. I have some standard just kind of wooden sculpting tools, but you could absolutely use like a butter knife or toothpicks or things like that if you don't have these. And then I have some fancy cling wrap. That's just I use that to put on top of the tile so that the clay doesn't stick directly to the acrylic paint yet, because I haven't sealed it yet. So what really my first decision that I have to think about is like, where do I want the eye and what do I want the structure to look like? So I have the eyeball itself, which is kind of my base that I'm going to use, but I want to be thinking about, with the visual structure of the eye, where do the cells match nicely, where it would create a good flow. And as I was looking at it, I noticed that I have this really nice line right here where I have some pretty small cells that I think would look good for the underside of the eye. Very similar to on this one, if you'll notice here, I had kind of a similar pattern where I have like a natural ridge that forms with a lot of the thicker black lines from the cell activator and lots of little cells that really have that kind of scale look to them. So I think that's the direction that I'm going to go. Although my inspiration for this one, the eye was going to be more of an angry eye, so we're going to see how that works when I do that tonight. But I just want to always kind of keep in mind the angle that I have for the eye, because if the corner of the eye is going to be here, you don't want the eye to be tilted and pointing in the wrong direction. So just kind of keeping that in mind. And what I've been doing, and hopefully my internet is still working, I keep getting a message here. What I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to just roll out a couple of really small, thin pieces, and just to get kind of the outline of the eyeball itself. So I don't have to be too fancy with this, and I happen to be using gray. The color for the clay actually really doesn't matter because I'm going to end up painting it afterwards anyways. But if I'm thinking about kind of what I would want the eye structure to look like, and since I'm going to do an angry eye, I'm also thinking of like where I want the ridge to be for that. So I just kind of play around with what looks like that might be a good placement. And one of the reasons I use the oven baked clay is that I don't have to worry about the clay drying out while I'm still doing the molding. So like it'll stay moldable, and I'll be able to do things with it up until I put it in the oven at 200 degrees for 15 or 20 minutes when I'm done. Part of the reason I have the cling wrap there is once I'm done molding this, I'm going to pull the eyeball part itself out from underneath because I don't want to bake that, it'll melt. And then I'll actually use a little piece of aluminum foil just to kind of pretend to be the eyeball, and then put that in the oven based on the time that the package says. Now the bottom eyelid, I need to do a little bit thinner, but not too much. Let's just kind of play around and see what I can get here. So again, I'm just going for some basic eye shapes. I'm not worried about details or anything yet. Just looking for Do I like how that looks? So I have the right kind of arch that I want, the eyeball in the right position, and how does it match up with the cells? One of the things I like about this clay is that it's really easy to blend the pieces together. But this is really just serving as the base for that structure, so I'm going to end up putting a lot of clay over the top of it, so it won't matter too much what it looks like right now. I think I'm pretty happy with that. So that's going to be the basic outline structure, and you can see how I kind of lined it up with the cells on the underside here. And so now what I need to do is I have to make some decisions about where I want some of the other structures on the eye to go. Mainly like any kind of horns that I want, or how do I want the eyelid itself? Do I want a ridge, or what am I kind of going for? And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to build another layer on top here that will serve as the base for any horns or ridges or things like that. So just to kind of give some more bulk to the eye, and to give something for me to kind of start attaching the pieces of clay to. So you can see it's really just about continuing to add in the pieces, and I'm always making sure my eye reference piece is kind of where I want it to be. I do want this to kind of stay straight because this is meant to be like an angry ridge, so I'm going to have to kind of watch, make sure that that stays that way. Don't want that to bow on me. Okay. So normally what I would want to do is I want to take, eventually what I'm going to do, I'll kind of show you here, is I'm going to use this little straight piece to create the impression of these little scales on the eye itself. But I'll add those details here in just a minute as I get the ridge put on. So I'm going to make that next piece. And for this one, I got to think about if am I going to want it to be where it is shaped. Do I want it to be where it's just smooth? Do I want it to have contours in it? If you notice on this one, you can kind of see that I have like little ridges that are carved into it. So it's really just a thin one put on top of this that I've then kind of carved in a little bit more detail. But I want it to go a little bit bigger. That might be a little bit too big. Let's tone that down just a tiny bit there. But what I'm opting for is relatively flat because I want it to be, I want to curve it upward a little bit. I'm hoping y'all can hear me okay, because I keep getting a message about my frame rate, so I'm sorry ahead of time if that's the case. So what I'm thinking here is I want to kind of lay this on top to create the ridge. Let's see if I like. I'm going to bow it up on the end to kind of curl it. And notice I haven't carved any details or anything into it, so right now it's really just about getting the shapes in there. Again, matching the curve of that kind of angry eye there. So I kind of like that. But right now it's smooth, and dragons don't have just like straight smooth pieces. So my next decision is where do I want to put in the little ridges. So these I do want to be kind of big, so I'm just going to use the flat part of this knife to cut in and create some of those bigger scales. That would be here. Just do that all the way down. Now for dragon or anything else, they're not going to have perfect cut marks on there. So once I finish with this, I'm going to take just a rounded tool and kind of soften those edges so it's not as smooth as like I'm cutting it with a knife like I am right now. Google is great for giving you ideas on how you want this to look, how deep you want it to go. I saw all different kinds of ones, but I really kind of like this pattern of having the different layers of scales there. You can see that kind of starting to take shape. Do you like that? For the main ridge. And then what I'm going to end up doing on top of this is I'm actually going to make individual scales and layer them on top, so I'm not as concerned about what this part looks like yet. I do want to add another kind of longer piece on the bottom to serve as the bottom of the lid. Again, just taking my Sculpty clay. This one I don't want to be too thick, but I am kind of finalizing the outside of the shape of the eye to kind of come together with that final piece there. About right there, I think. And here I want to be thinking about the line of the eye because I don't want the eye to become crooked. Make sure I have my kind of angry scowl there. Okay. Feel pretty good about that. I'm going to add in some of the detail on these inner parts right now before I start building the scales outward. I did find that it was a little bit harder to do that if I waited too long, just because it's harder to get into some of these details. So I'm just using a knife here to kind of smooth the joining edges where I push the pieces together, kind of rough it up a little bit, and smooth it back over. And then I'm using just, it's really just a rounded piece of wood. And what this does is it kind of gives it a little bit of texture so it doesn't look just like a smooth piece of clay. And I'm going to do that before I cut in the details on this one. Because it is so small, it's just a little bit harder to get into that afterward. Now you might be wondering, because here on the outsides, like on these corners here and here, that's kind of hard to see in the tile, but you could see straight through to the tile underneath. Eventually what I'm going to do once I bake this is I'm going to go through and then I'm going to add some white UV resin and seal that in there to create the whites of the eye, to kind of seal it in and make it look like an actual eye. It also gives it that glossy kind of wet eye effect as well. Okay, so I like the texture there. So now I'm going to take my little sharp blade, for lack of a better word, and I'm just going to cut in the tiny scales for right around the eye. And again, they don't have to be perfect because, number one, dragons are imaginary, so there's not anything set, but also just like in nature, nothing is exactly perfect. So this dragon really was an angry red dragon. You know, they may have had battles, they may have scars and scratches, so it's not going to be the end of the world if it's not perfect or it doesn't fit exactly. So I'm just maybe taking 1/8 of an inch or so in between each one and just making like a little cut mark in there. Let's see, like I scratch that one a little bit, just smooth it out if I don't like it. I haven't textured the big ones yet, so I need to go back and do those as well. Then I'm going to do the same thing to the bottom. And I'm trying to keep in mind the angle of the cuts, just to think about how it would line up, kind of like the center point of the eye, so that the cuts aren't all going in the same direction. And when you do these, you want to make them deep enough, because when you paint them, this is where you really kind of can get some of the accents and really the depth to the sculpture, because this is where, you know, like your black lowlights would really sink in and make it look more three-dimensional. So any of the little details, even the scratches and things, the imperfections on the cuts, kind of just help to give it more authenticity later on. Okay, I feel pretty good about the inside. I'll hold this up a little bit so you can see where we're at so far with the eye. So you can see we have the inner ridges there. I have the outer ridge, kind of the main construction of it. I might actually thin this out a little bit. I'm not sure I like this as thick right here. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just do the same thing and texture this outer ridge before I start building the scales on the top part. I was actually thinking I might want to go more with some more prominent horns coming off of this one, so we'll see what that looks like. So just like I did on the other one, I'm just going to draw my kind of score lines. These I'm going to make a little bit bigger, since this would be the outside part of the eye. I'm going to draw these a little bit first. I'm also trying not to make them line up with the lens on the inner part of the eye. I don't know if they would in the real world, because dragons are imaginary, but it would make sense to me that they would be staggered. So I'm just going through and drawing these lines to give those details of how the scales on the eye would come together. And I'm going to kind of play with this a little bit. People have some bigger scales over that. I think I'm going to trim this and draw a line here just to kind of see for myself where I want this eye to go. I think I'm probably going to end up trimming that back there a little bit just to give it a better structure. But then I go in and add these details and make those cuts a little bit deeper. And then I also, what I tend to do with the blade when I go in the second time is use the blade to kind of flatten the cut line so that it doesn't look like I cut it. It looks more like a rounded indentation. I haven't seen any questions or comments yet, so feel free to use the chat. I do have my screen up, so hopefully I'll be able to see that pretty real time. And again, on these scales, I'm just going through and making them look a little bit more prominent. Let's do that one a little bit too much. Love to know, for those of you that are here, where are you guys from? Are you, I know we're in Houston, Texas right now, where I think the sun goes to die because it's like 93 with a heat index of like 115, I think. So very warm outside. Okay, I'm kind of liking those scales on the bottom. Pull this up a little bit so y'all can see that. So you can see so far I have the inner lids kind of done here and here. I'm going for an angry arch, kind of, I guess that, yeah, it still looks angry. It's got the little point there. I'll make sure to make the horns make that a little bit more prominent too, I think. Then I have the second ridge here, which is kind of almost like the eyelid, I guess, if you would imagine, where if they had eyelashes, that might be where they would come from. And so next, really, my next piece is going to be to start thinking about the scales and the horns on the top portion here, and how far I want to build them out, how I want to layer them. Definitely, if you have bigger ones, you want to put, if there would be in the background, you want to add those first. Because this is oven baked clay, you don't have to be as worried about bubbles and things like that. I mean, it's always something to keep in mind because you don't want it to expand and pop while it's in the oven. But I did kind of work the clay pretty good before this session started, so I shouldn't have to worry too much about that. But that's kind of where we're at for this one. So let's start thinking about some of these horns. I'm going to take another piece, try to make like a cone kind of a shape. Remember, this is going to be flat too, so when I initially roll it, I just want to keep in mind it's going to flatten out at the base for it. Really, this process really is just kind of what you have in your head, kind of just creating a vision for it. Let's see. Actually, you know, I think I want that one to be a little bit thicker. Kind of a balance between, you want the horn to be rounded, but you want the bottom to be flat. Oh, I think I like that size better. Okay, I'll start with this one here. And for these, what I am going to try to do is where it meets the eyelid, I do want to kind of drag and pull and try to blend that together just to give it a better seal. This will help it when it cooks in the oven to where it doesn't crack off in the process. It just makes it a little bit more solid. And in the end, it won't really matter because, again, I'm going to texture some of this anyways to, because you don't want it to be perfectly smooth. Nothing in nature is perfectly smooth like that. And then I do have a little bit of a gap here, but I'm going to add some additional scale so it'll be okay in the long run. I like that first one there. Tend to go for odd numbers, but I'm trying to decide if I want to do odd numbers or if I want to do even. Feeling like this next one would go about here. I'm just going to kind of smooth that onto the eye ridge that I have here. Let's see. Nope, I think I'm going to go with odds for that. Definitely think I need that third one. Okay. Actually, this clay kind of has some cracks in it. I kind of like that. And that way it would look like the dragon horn might not be totally perfect. this back end. And again, just kind of blending it in there. And then for all three of these, what I'm going to kind of do now is I'm just going to take this rounded wooden stick and I'm just going to add some texture onto it just by tapping it, because it wouldn't be perfectly smooth in nature. Thinking about if this really was a red dragon, it's probably fought battle, so I might even draw some cracks or scratches in here that when I do the painting side of it, then I'll be able to kind of highlight those a little bit more. Like this one already has some kind of in it. Doesn't have to be anything crazy because I'm not looking for scales on this since this is horn, but just to make it so that it's not perfectly smooth. So you got someone else that joined, so welcome. For those of you who opt to watch the video later, if you have comments or things, this is really kind of my first creation live stream, so any thoughts that you have or things that I can do differently, I'm always open to that kind of feedback. So this is kind of where we're at. I'm going to bring it in a little bit closer so you can see. So far we have the two inner eyelids. I have the kind of brow ridge kind of starting to build here with the upper eyelid as well. I also started to create the kind of three horns that I'm looking, oh actually I kind of like that curve. Maybe I'll curve these up instead of having them come straight out. To build those, and then my next piece is going to be start adding the scales on this top portion to kind of blend all the pieces together, and I'll carry those onto the bottom as well. And you can kind of see what I did. I didn't go in as much detail on this one, but you can see on the top side here, hopefully you can see all the little kind of ridge scales. There's a couple layers of them that give some three-dimensional texture, and these have like little points on the scales that protrude a little bit. And then same on the bottom, there's some extra scales that kind of add to that. So that's the effect that I'm going for with this. And I really am thinking I'm going to go ahead and kind of trim this part off here. I'm always mindful that I have the bloom underneath this. I don't want to press too hard with any of these tools, so I don't want to scratch the paint that's underneath. Yeah, I think that's going to give me that eye definition a little bit more like I want. This actually kind of makes it look like it's angry and kind of scrunched right there. Actually, I kind of like those wrinkles that it's putting in there too. Okay, so next is going to be to start to build out some of the individual scales. So depending on how big you want the scale, these are pretty easy. I mean, these are just a piece of the clay that you start off into a ball and just kind of smoosh it flat to make the scale. And then depending on what you want the scale to look like, you can shape it like on these ones. I started off, these actually have a point to them, so they look more like a triangle shape that I would stack on top of each other. So because of that, you're going to really be starting from the back here and working your way to the front so that you're layering the scales on top of each other. So with these, if I want it to be more kind of pointy and scaly, I do think my circle's a little bit too big, so I'm going to take a little bit off there. For this here, I would just go through and kind of shape this. So I'm just going to take really just a flat edge of anything. Use my fingernails if I currently had any, but just took off all my dips, so I don't have any fingernails at the moment. And then just kind of smooth that over, and then really it's a rinse and repeat process. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to take a small ball of clay, and I'm going to work it into that kind of triangle shape with a point that I just did. Again, oh, nope, don't like that, so start over. So I do want it to have kind of a flat-ish bottom, so that way it'll connect to the ridge pretty well, and it'll layer. but when I make the point, I can kind of exaggerate and pull on it a little bit so you can see that's my second one that I have there. And I'm going to place that, let's see, about right there. And as I place it, if I push on this side, you can see it kind of creates some lift, but I can go back and pull those across a little bit more as I attach them. On the front side, it's okay if you see the definition here and here because they're the individual scales that are attached. So now it's really just a matter of doing the same thing over and over again. So again, I got the flat piece here. If you haven't seen, I do have a reel posted of how I made the actual tile itself. That how-to is already up there. So I'm just going to keep working around the eye. Oh, that's looking really good. I like that. To fit all of the pieces in, kind of where I want them to be. So I do keep in mind the size of it because I started out pretty big. I want to gradually go smaller, but I don't want to go too small too fast. So I want to keep them about the same size as much as possible. So I make each of these little scales. And again, if you have questions, or I know some of you weren't here for the beginning, so if you have questions about how I did something that you see here, I'm happy to answer those if you want to throw them in the chat or in the comments. Ooh, I like that side better. Okay, so here's my next one. And again, I'm just keeping in mind where I'm at on the ridge so I can kind of see where my scales go and how they're going to look really from the front, since that's the side everybody's going to see. So I've got 4 so far, so I'm going to bring you in close one more time so you guys can kind of see. So we have our 2 inner ridges here. Remember, I put the extra row of clay underneath all of this to kind of give it some structure. Then I added the horns and I gave them some texture with just the round edge of this clay tool, just because things in nature don't have perfectly smooth edge. You can see why I wasn't too concerned about the connection pieces, like from right here, because I knew that these scales that I was going to add were going to cover those up. So all I'm doing when I connect these is not really easier if I do it with the flat side, is I'm just going to kind of smear them just to try to give it a good joint so that they don't try to flake off when I bake it in the oven. And I did have somebody ask me, I think I said it earlier, but you may not have been here, had someone ask me about the air bake or air dry clay. And what I didn't like about that is just you have the limited work time before the clay starts to get crumbly. And I really didn't want to have to be working against the clock. I know that when you have to do it for resin and things like that, you always have to be mindful of how long you have for your work time, and it's kind of the same with clay. This kind of clay, just the Sculpty Premo oven bake, will stay good and really until you bake it in the oven, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, I'm just building my next scale here. They almost kind of remind me of teeth when you make them, especially if you do the pointed ones. And I'm just going to keep working my way around. I'm also hoping my internet connection is letting you guys hear, because I keep getting a warning. Yeah, thank you, Alicia. So I see your comment there. The one I'm currently using, it's just the Sculpty Premo clay. It's just the oven baked clay. You get it from Michael's. So it's not too crazy or anything like that. But you know, I might be able. Okay, forgive me if I messed up my camera, but I think I can zoom in some. Oh, not those buttons. You know, I'm not going to worry about it because I don't want to accidentally turn it off. But I'll think about that next time if there's a way I can get a little bit of a closer view. But let me bring you in so you can kind of see what I've done so far. Like that piece I just added was this one right here. just kind of putting it in on the top. And all I'm doing, I do with the little straight piece here, but it's just kind of smoothing the edges so that when you bake it, that it allows it to stay. You know what, I think I can fix this. Hang on, let's see. I actually have this up a little higher, but I think I can bring it down some. Let's see if that's better. What do you think? Is that closer? Does that work better for you to be able to see? Hopefully that works a little bit better. I'll keep that in mind for next time. And here, so as you're working these, you just want to be thinking about the placement, like what do you want the scale to look like, because once you do have it in its final position, when it bakes, you're not going to be able to change anything about it. And you could probably sand it maybe, but just going to kind of keep working around. So all I'm doing right now is just kind of creating my flat little triangle as I'm coming. Oh, that one's a little too small. I don't like that. Let's try that again. See if I can type this across my screen here. I think I mentioned in the beginning as well that I happen to be doing this in gray, but you notice that the ones that are here, or the other colors that I have, are like gray, black, and gold. And this is just to get the main part down. I'll probably end up doing another video to show the painting of it once it's actually baked and ready to put on, because that'll be a whole nother piece. I made that one too small, and this one's got a little bit too much clay. And it's, again, it's okay. Like you can see this one little piece that I'm making, it's very irregular. It's not perfect. You don't want it to be perfect because scales and things in nature have a general shape, but they don't stay the same. They get damaged or used differently. So it's okay if it's not the same exact shape or same size or same thickness. All those things would vary naturally in nature as well. Now the other thing that I'm thinking as I'm looking at this here, I have these big horns over here and I have the big scales. I'm going to try it and see what happens. I'm kind of thinking about doing little horns instead of scales, make them more like cones to kind of give some ridges on the front side. So let's see what that would look like. So kind of roll it and then tap it on here to give it kind of a flat edge. Let's see. And if I hate it, I can just take it off and do something different. Do a couple more and see if I like those. Same sizes, just making them more horn looking rather than as flat and kind of scaly looking. I actually think I need to grab a little bit more clay. So the one thing with this clay, what I found, and just in my experience, is that there are certain colors that are softer than others. You do want to work the clay when you take it fresh out of the package. You want it to be pretty easy to manipulate. Like this, I just pulled away, and you can see when I squeeze it, it kind of starts to break and move initially. So you just want to manipulate it with your hand and kind of work it until it gets more like Play-Doh-ish. But some colors are easier to do this than others. I know the white that I have is very crumbly and it takes a long time to get it to be really workable. I know some people, people who do oven baked jewelry, this is the same kind of clay that they use. So it's very malleable for the most part. I found heating it up helps too, but it's been pretty warm in Texas, so I haven't had to do much. The house temperature is a little bit warmer than it normally is. Okay, that's pretty good. You can see now when I'm squishing it, I don't get any of the breakage on it. It just kind of smooshes, so that tells me it's in a good place for me to start shaping it. Not as much worried about working on air bubbles or things like that. If this was pottery and going into a kiln at really high temperatures, I might be worried. Don't want to create any obvious air pockets, but for purposes of what we're doing here, I think I'll be okay. This one looks like it's a little bit of a bigger horn, but actually I kind of like that. Gonna have to work on the point of that one. Pull it out a little bit more. There we go. And then I think I am kind of liking that, so I'm gonna go ahead and do the attachment a little bit more here. Just kind of smooth the edges into the regular part. And you'll notice I have some little, well, you may not see that because that's pretty close, but as I've been attaching it, you may see little nicks and things like that. And again, those kind of things are fine. Because in the real world, if this was a actual dragon, you know, it would have to catch its prey and catch things with its mouth, so things would scratch it. So it doesn't need to be perfectly smooth or perfect. And even if I wanted to, I could probably break a couple of these off and make them look jagged on purpose, and we would still be okay. Okay. I'm also kind of keeping in mind what's going on in the background here, because my vision for this is like, this is the eye kind of branching to where if I were to do the rest of the dragon, this would be like the scales for the nose and the mouth as it came off. Okay, let's see. Oh, making the wrong kind of scale. Hold on, got distracted. Okay, let's see here. Yeah, kind of like that one, but a little bit smaller again. I think I want to bring it towards the center just a little. And this piece here, you attach it a little bit more, and then I'll make it a little bit more pointy. I find that when you attach it, you tend to squish it a little bit, so they don't keep their points as well. I saw we had somebody either come back or someone new joining us, so I'm kind of working around the last bits here, and I think I'm gonna actually come back with some scales and add them here. Just since I added the horns, I didn't cover as much of that base, but give you kind of a quick rundown of what we've done so far. So we started with the eye here, and we added the inner layer, trying to give it a mean look. I'm not sure if it kept the mean look, but it's looking wicked right now. But then we added the lower inner lid here. I added a thick bar underneath all of this, just as support for all of the scales and whatnot. And then I added the brow ridge across the top here. So like in people, this would be like where your eyelashes would be coming out of. I guess someday if I did a girly dragon, I could add some eyelashes or something. That might be kind of fun, kind of going a little bit like Shrekish there. And then I added the bottom eyelid here to kind of come to a point. And I tried to line it up with the cells and stuff that I have on the bloom to where it would make sense to me. Like I liked all the little tiny details in these little cells here. I also thought I could do it with this side with the gold as well, but I wanted to kind of focus more on the red. And I'm just using gray Sculpty Premo clay. This is just the kind you can get at Michael's or really any craft store. That part was supposed to be cut off. And it's oven baked clay, so I don't have to worry about work time or anything like that. Because when I'm all done, I'll cook this minus the eyeball in the oven for about 25-30 minutes or so, and then once it cools, I'll be ready to paint it. And then the other thing I'll have to do is you can see here that you can see straight through to the bloom, right? So this would be where the white part of our eyes would be. And so once this is baked and I actually go through and attach this, what I do is add white resin on these inside edges and kind of along the edge here to give it the actual eyeball look, and it gives it that kind of glistening color. I'm going to show you the other one that I base this off of, where you can really see the white part of the eye underneath there. So I'll add that so you can't see the bloom tile underneath. Okay, I think that's probably enough horns. on that side. So I'm going to do a couple of smaller scales just to kind of cover this and to, you know, keep that continuity of the scale shape. But again, for my viewer who's still here, if you have questions or things like that, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll either answer them as best I can here or type it in. Let's see here. I might have to go and do a smaller scale first to kind of tuck in over there. See what that looks like. So I got a little tiny scale. See if I can tuck him in here. Maybe. Well, I might need some help from my friend because I can't get it detached from my finger. It's okay. I don't want the scale to go up the horn now. There we go. I'll just kind of tuck him in there. And this next one, I think, no, that one's still too big for that one. Let's do this one here. I'll make this a little bit longer and see if that helps. Being able to attach it. Curl it under like that. Much better. Okay. Then I'm going to use my little straight piece and just kind of blend it in. Oh, I kind of lost this point mixing them. Here. I think I'm going to bring these around the front right here, like that. Okay, almost done with the front part of the eye. Then the last thing I have to do is on this back ridge right here, I want to add a couple of scales as well, so it's not just the front part. Not the front part alone, that is the only one that has the scales or the ridges. And then I also need to go back on all of these and kind of texture those and the ridge a little bit so that it's not perfectly smooth. Actually, I think I'm pretty happy, except for, I like how that one ended up laying down. I'm going to prod him over this way. There we go. Okay. And then the last piece I'm going to do, I think, here is I'm going to smooth this down, and then I think I'm going to cut in some scales, just to kind of continue, excuse me, like what we had done for the ridge line. A little bit under the weather myself. Okay. Pretty happy with that. Actually, no, for getting it to attach to the tile, I actually used just super glue, and then once I resin it, what you can see, I'm not sure if you can see how thick the shine is here. So I do a layer of UV resin over the top of all of the clay once I finish painting it. And then I actually go through and resin the entire tile, which really kind of seals everything together. So the eyes you can make with resin cabochon, so just the resin circles, and then you can either print the eyes with like paper. I'm actually experimenting with looking at doing some enamel paints to make some kind of cooler details and stuff in the eyes. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to share some of the processes with this one here. I did have the painting video for this one and the gray tile. They should be in my reels. If you haven't gone to look at those yet, I think those should be in there as well. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to do, and I apologize, my voice is starting to cut out of me. I was hoping it was going to last the whole time, is I'm going to add some of the same process of the scales on this bottom side, and just so you can see some of the texture there. And then we just need to go through and texture all of the scales, and that'll pretty much be it for this here. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm just rolling out a little ball and then kind of shaping what I want the scales to look like. Although I do want these to be a little bit flatter on the top, so I don't want them to come up over the ridges that I've already created, since this is kind of just blending with that there. And again, it's okay if it comes down some, because it's just going to blend out with the rest of it, and I'll paint it to kind of make it blend in with the tiles. But thank you, Alicia, for all the compliments. This is my first one that I've done like this. So I've done painting videos before on my YouTube channel, but I've never done a sculpting one. The eye was actually my first attempt at a dragon eye, and there was so much excitement by it. I was like, man, I really feel like I need to share this with people because it's a lot of fun. I like making things just kind of in general, but fantasy is always a big appeal for me. I know our family, we play Dungeons and Dragons, so we have some personal affinity to doing things with dragons, so it was kind of fun. The gray one was actually a gift for my husband. He had actually requested it and took it as a challenge, and I was like, you know, I've never tried to make a dragon before, but I'm gonna give it a shot, and now I'm hooked. So having a lot of fun with it. You know what, I don't like that scale. Let me flip that one around. You can see the roll. Nope, just gonna start over. Okay, I think this might be my last one, so I'm gonna try to blend this one in pretty good at the base. Maybe have it kind of tuck under to kind of hide it. Obviously, if this was a real dragon, it would keep going all the way around and blend into its actual body, but I haven't got there yet where I'm gonna do that. So I'm just going to kind of smooth this, make it blend together. And then make sure that I keep the etched lines that I had created there. Okay, I feel pretty good. I'll bring this in so you guys can see a little bit closer all the pieces that we've done. You want to kind of look at it from multiple angles too, just to make sure there's nothing kind of wonky with it. But we started with the eye, just determining its placement. Then we created the inner ridge, or the inner eyelid on the top and on the bottom, just a thin little snake. Then there's a support one underneath this, just to make sure that there's something to hold it all up. And then created the kind of ridge pattern you see here, which is more the upper eyelid. And that's what all of the scales and the horns really kind of are attached to. Had the 3 large horns, gave them some texture. Added the lower eyelid and kind of cut in all the details for these scales. And again, the more kind of scratches and things that they have on them, the more detail it'll pick up when you do the painting, which really I think kind of just gives it a different character for those pieces. But the last thing I have to do is I want to go through with my kind of rounded clay tool here, and I'm just going to go through and touch all of the scales. Again, let's see how close I can get it and see on my camera. We'll zoom in. But all I'm trying to do here is to just make it not look like smooth clay. So just kind of taking off that sheen and giving it a little bit of a bumpy edge. And that just makes it look more realistic, because in nature, none of those things would be perfectly shiny. So you don't want your dragon scales to look like they were made out of smooth clay. So just anywhere I see too much shine, I'm just going through and just very lightly tapping it with this rounded edge, and it gives it some different pieces. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the ones on the top here. And I'm not trying to blend, so you don't want to push hard. You're just tapping it, but the clay is soft enough that when you touch it, you can see, I mean, I'm not even holding it at the end there, but you just touch it and it kind of adds those little indentations and things. And then anywhere you see, like right here, you can see it's separating a little bit. So I do want to make sure I push those together so when it bakes, it stays well connected. Now these horns might be a little tricky to do the texture on. I might have to do some reshaping with them afterward, but you still want to either rub on them or something to kind of take away that perfection. Actually, the rubbing might work better. Look like bone streaks and they would have on them. And then these I can go back to tapping. Now when you do this, you might lay them down flat like I'm doing there. So before I bake it, I just want to make sure I use a tool to lift them back up so they can protrude the way that I want them to. Like those I'll just lay down flat, so I'm going to take my tool and just kind of lift these back up and position them how I want them to be for when they go into the oven. There we go. Okay, I think I'm going to call this one done. So again, thank you so much for stopping by, or if you're watching this video later, I appreciate it. Would love any feedback, whether you liked kind of the live video where you can ask questions, or if you prefer just watching the video afterward. But thanks again.